Well, She-Hulk episode 6 is the latest in the long line of episodes that have been coming out. Um, and I'll be honest with you. Well, the bait and switch. Well, I kind of even hesitate saying the bait and switch. I know it's on the graphic, and then the full screen graphic said, "Where is Daredevil?" And part of
Hmm.
that is like what the reaction has been from the audience this week, because last week they ended. I think the last shot in the episode was the helmet of Daredevil, the new costume that apparently he's ordered through this, the Edna mode of the MCU, if you will. Um, and so
Do
like
they
it was
have
being
that?
packed up to get shipped out to him, or he's gonna pick it up, I suppose. So this
Hmm.
week, people were thinking, "Oh, this is the Daredevil episode from the trailers that we have been like waiting for," and it wasn't. It it totally. And then
What are they
much
doing
like
over there?
so, well, this is kind of so. Here's what I think they're doing. This show has a propensity to basically try to It's got the worst case of wanting to subvert expectations for the sake of wanting to subvert expectations, and then their solution to that is be self-aware about it, and then use like some sort of a fourth wall break. Like for example, at the beginning of this episode, Jen is like talking to her friend, and then she's like, "Oh, by the way, I know this is super inconvenient this late in the season, but this is a standalone uh, wedding episode, and but just go with it." And then
They're
we
they're
just kind of go
doing
on with the rest of the
they're
episode.
doing fourth wall breaks. They're doing self-awareness wrong. It's like
Yes.
it's
Oh
like
yeah.
she's saying, "Hey, the show's really bad, uh, and we know.
Yeah.
So here's the next
It's the
episode."
wrong ways.
It's like they're flipping off the camera. That's not right.
And what I realized, because here's what I decided to do this week, right? I have been like, one of the big things that has annoyed me about Disney plus Marvel shows for a long time is this idea that we get like these really, like, for on one hand you go watch like a House of the Dragon regardless whether you like it or not, or Rings of Power, and each episode is a proper like 52 minutes to an hour or longer, right? Because they're giving you something that feels like a full meal. Whereas She-Hulk, much like a lot of these other Marvel shows, they feel like you're watching a 25-minute sitcom that doesn't even is not even formatted like a sitcom, because most sitcoms, they have like a beginning, middle, and end. A lot of these episodes
I
feel
w-
like
I was gonna I
they're
was gonna
a
call
movie.
this I was gonna call this
Yeah,
like candy versus like a meal,
yeah,
but that would it's more like a cigarette. It's like it's not even good. There's nothing good about it. It's like a dirty old cigarette that you can like a used cigarette. That's what this show is. It's there's no sustenance whatsoever. There's no good idea in terms of actually ingesting it. Don't
nope, never
don't
mind.
that's all good. Don't why are they making this stuff?
I
It's
so
it's
what I was
insulting.
Yeah, like, let me so what I was saying earlier was basically I decided to kind of give myself, like, give the show maybe a more of an earnest opportunity to earn my interest again. I went
You're
and
being
watched
generous.
back I went and watched back, like, I think I started from episode 3, because I didn't want to go any further back than that. Actually, was it episode? It might have been episode 4. I just basically the episode after the one with the twerking, because I couldn't bear to watch Megan Thee Stallion anymore in the MCU. I'm like, I got way more than I ever wanted. Don't want it. Let's move on. So, but I
Yeah.
went. So I was like, I want to watch like a bigger chunk of the show, like back to back to back, and see how I feel about it at that point. But what I ultimately ended up realizing is, yes, these episodes in and of in themselves are all like almost on purpose incomplete, because that's kind of how they're designed.
Mm.
Um, this show on one hand is designed more like a complete, um, like, there's a lot of episodes in the show I realized that well, episode 1, the one with Megan Thee Stallion to a certain degree, and the latest episode, they do act more like a standalone episode than most of the other ones. But
Yeah.
even then, what I real and that I realized, but what I surprisingly came to a conclusion is this show, like, where it kind of takes off some people, is I realized the pattern that you pointed out after the first episode, which is most, if not all, the male characters in the show are almost like caricaturized from like a extreme feminist point of
Yeah.
view,
Yeah.
where and
There
I
seems to
was
be a
like
lot of that
early
going around actually.
yeah, and then early on, like when the show first started, what I was hoping was this was a show that may okay, maybe I was like, one small sample size, maybe they'll get better from here. Like, let's give them a chance. But now, 6 episodes in, every male character they introduce, even like the 5 people that Jen dates in the previous episode to this one, they're all like caricatures. Like none of them have any emotional depth, and the only characters that the show decides to develop to have some level of depth beyond like the superficial, like what a stereotype of a person would be, are like some of the female characters. And I think part of that has to do with those are the characters you're following all the time. But like
Mm.
even the recurring male characters, like there's not a lot of emotional depth to them, and I just
Yeah.
and the show I realize takes a lot of veiled shots at like toxic masculinity, which sometimes I'm like, okay, fair enough, but don't poke the bear if you don't plan on addressing the issue in a meaningful manner, because then all you're
Yeah.
doing is like
It's
it's like bullying a bully is still bullying is how I kind of came to think of it, and
Yeah, and
it's
I
not
don't know.
necessary.
The more I watch this kind of content, and Don't Worry, Darling is just full of the exact same stuff, but it's creating a boogeyman, and like you can say toxic masculinity exists, and you can point to a constellation of things that truly do occur, but it's like if that's the demon you're fighting in your life, the rest of your life is pretty good. And these caricatures that they build, these boogeymen that they make, it's so unrealistic that as a man watching it, I'm just like, no, it's like you're you're basically doing man face, like you're these men are pretending to be a stereotype and like an exaggerated, offensive simplification and reduction of somebody's neurosis around men, but it's not what men are, and that's to be
Exactly.
that reductive about any type of person is offensive. That's offensive. There you go. This show is offensive.
Exactly. And it's like, for example, there's this and then sometimes it does a decent job of like setting up a concept. Like they're trying to tackle like I think they introduced this like this social media, like almost like a Reddit-esque, or
Yeah,
maybe more like, what's the one that Donald Trump like started supporting? Um
his
it was
own.
like, huh? There was like
The
another, because he's not on Twitter anymore, so they jumped on a
He's got
whatever.
Truth Social now.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. So I think their intent was they called it intelligentsia, and they're
Oh,
like, oh,
jeez.
like and then oh, that social media network where a bunch of, I think, what was it? I forget the exact term they use, where um bunch of some kind of like basically like a derogatory comment towards like misogynistic men essentially.
Did they say
Um
incels?
no, no, although it
Okay.
seems like that word is goes gets tossed out a lot on the internet, the show
Yeah.
never has mentioned it.
Okay.
But that's like that then later in this episode we find out that that's tied to what we finally might realize is the ultimate antagonist, the villain of the show, is the one behind the running of this network, and it's like that network is a front for like some kind of like evil villainous activity of some kind. I don't know if they're leaning towards a terrorist sort of a plot, or this person is after her blood basically. This is the person driving that whole thing when they tried to assault her in the street and get her blood, and her skin is impenetrable, so they're trying again, I guess. But the point being that that was that so much, not so much as much a concern. I'm like, okay, fair enough, cool. I guess we'll see where that thread, how that unfurls. There was another comment though where I think this was at the end of the last episode where she like in dialogue you're like, we could have we could have like all the, or like we could have all the power in the world, and yet somebody on the internet can think we were wrong, and they just like laughed that off in the middle of conversation. It just dropped in, and it's like this big like real shot that kind of comes out of nowhere, which is like, wait, I paused it, I went back and listened to it. I'm like, wait, what? Like this is random in the middle at the end of the conversation that like her lawyer that was fighting for her that against Titania, like she represented her in court, that lawyer person
Mm.
and Tatiana Maslany's Jen Walters just having this conversation in a bar and just like ended the conversation and laughing it up and just like they just like drop it in there in the middle. I'm like, whoa, hold on, why is that necessary? I'm like, you could easily just say, sure, they're calling out like they're like I by the way, this show has made me realize
Mm.
that the idea of calling out bad behavior is in and of itself neither it's not productive, like that's the best way that I
No,
can describe it. I'm like, if you're gonna try to address the situation, then you address it, and addressing it doesn't just involve calling it out, it
it's
involves then
lazy,
doing
is
something
what it
about it.
is. It's
Yeah, it's easy.
lazy and it's
Yeah,
irresponsible. It's like you're basically it's a billboard that says toxic masculinity 50 times, and all it is like what this does, it doesn't propose any solutions, and it doesn't tell women how to deal with these things, or like what it does is it creates the paranoia for this type of exaggerated monster that doesn't exist. That's really what it is.
yeah, and
That's what we'll
yeah,
call it. What it is. This, don't worry, darling. It's feminist propaganda from women who aren't actually oppressed in any way.
I sort of kind of, especially with regard to Don't Worry Darling, I sort of agree. But what in terms of wrapping up this conversation with this
Sure.
episode, um by the way, the CGI, I think I think they're starting to get better at it in certain respects because I noticed something that the CGI starts to get better in some scenes and in some scenes is really bad. And
Mhm.
maybe it's because they have multiple vendors working on the CGI shots. So then the same assets are being passed around and then one vendor might not have enough time or they were
Yeah.
just not as good as the other one. That might be part of it. And I think the in terms of the texturing, the hair, like the way the light interacts with the model of She-Hulk, it's gotten better. And even the animation, the facial animation, like the body movement and everything is better, the transformation stuff. But in some situations, it's still bad. So basically, the
Yeah.
CGI
No,
goes
you know
from being
what?
really good
No,
to being really bad from
no
shot to
matter how
shot.
many improvements they make on the CGI, it's not going to make up for lazy,
Right.
angry writing.
Because I'm like, the reason why I'm even focused on the CGI is because the writing's not compelling enough to like keep me just like interested in the
Yeah.
story. And I still think the biggest problem the show has is meandering. Like for example, and just this would be the last thing we talk about on this episode in particular would be you watch a show, like go back and watch an X-Files season. You watch a season like go like tune into season 5 of the X-Files, for example. Like maybe like
Sure.
what a lot of people consider the peak of the show, like in the middle years of its run. You watch like 20 episodes, so way more than the 9 episodes you're gonna get here. But X-Files was one of those shows where they would have like an intro, like the season premiere, they'd have a mid-season finale, mid-season premiere, and then finale. And those were like the episodes where you had like the big story arcs that were addressed, like that involved the characters and like the longer term goal
Hmm.
of the show, what they were chasing. And then in the middle episodes, a lot of those were like Monster of the Week episodes. But
Yeah.
even then, you always had a narrative thrust. I think that's the best way to describe it. There was a narrative
Yeah.
thrust. You knew kind of what this character's like motto was, like what did Mulder want, and he wants to find the truth with regard to like UFOs and aliens, and then Scully's job is to either support him or like discredit him, which is how her character started out. And they're both are like that's what they're always doing. Whereas in this
Yeah.
show, I just, beyond
Well,
her trying to be a good lawyer, I don't know what narrative thrust Jen Walters provides to this show, and then everything happening around her feels like this is just, we're just tuning into the world of the MCU and what's happening in the world with regards to She-Hulk, and even then it feels forced at times. Like some of the ways they bring in Wong and try to tie him into an episode, I'm like,
yeah.
Wong could have done that with any other character. They just had to do it because She-Hulk happened to be the show on air right now, and that's the big piece that's missing. I think without a proper narrative thrust, uh, this show feels like it's going nowhere, and I've seen a lot of people drop off of it because of that reason, and
Yeah, it's honestly
it's
it
unfortunate.
reeks of like corporate overreach in terms of the creative process here, and between the writing notes about what type of politics the show should have and what, just even the motivation for making the show, the order that they've chosen to present the story, and everything just feels like bad corporate notes that don't take into account the mission of the MCU, the concept of She-Hulk. It doesn't honor the concept of She-Hulk either. It's just, it's just the epitome of corporate people who don't understand what storytelling or creativity is about. We did get a good comment on one of our videos about this. Shall we take a look at that real fast, just to wrap this up?
Yeah. This is a comment from episode 5 review. So we were reviewing episode 6 this week, but this is somebody from episode 5.
Shall I?
Yeah.
Okay.
All yours.
Comment of the week from Asta Ono. The black actress playing her lawyer would have been a better choice as She-Hulk. Could have took a serious look at Supes going to court, kids discovering powers, lots to work with. What could have been? Yeah. I'm glad that you bolded that last line. What could have been? This whole show, really, from the beginning, we've been saying it could be funnier, it could be lighter, it could have been a lot more imaginative. There's no shortage of things that could have made this show awesome, and they've missed every opportunity.
And I don't know if that's, again, subverting expectations for the sake of subverting expectations, because they, like, this comment talked about Supes going to court. Literally, there was a whole movie where Superman goes to court, and then obviously the courtroom gets blown up. That's aside, but we have seen that, or like in The Boys, there's been episodes where like superheroes get taken to court and bad shit happens, whatever. And then the other idea of, discovering your powers and what do you do with that and how do you deal with the consequences. And at this point, people are probably thinking, oh, well, but every superhero story in some way deals with that. I mean, this show somewhat deals with that, and to that end, I think this latest episode did a good job of. This was the very first episode of the show, episode 6, which felt like they actually gave an earnest amount of time and effort to developing the character of She-Hulk and really helping us to care for who Jennifer Walters is, as what her internal struggles are, and kind of externalizing that. Whether it's like she's dating in her 30s was like a big theme, and then the struggles of what that looks like, and then it's kind of like tied into what happened last episode as well. So but I think the consistency is not there, and that's the problem. Is not only is the consistency not there because they don't seem to have a very strong overarching story that doesn't generate an inherent narrative thrust. You end up in a situation where the show meanders, and so the writing suffers because, I don't know, the writers maybe don't have, like, they're like, well, I guess we know what we're going to do in episode 1 and episode 9, and maybe even episode 5. I just don't know what 3 and 4 are going to be, so let's just have fun with it. Like, that's what it feels like, that how this show is structured.
I think, how many more episodes do we have left of this show?
3 more.
Jeez.
Yeah.
It's been exhausting.
6 out of 9, so 3 more to go.
It's been exhausting to even hear about this show. But, we'll keep up with it, and we'll let you know if it gets any better. So stay tuned for that. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Spotify, any place you get a podcast. Tell your friends about Oh So Curious, your existential movie podcast, because really, these the content that they're throwing at us, it's like they are trying to get us to think a certain way. And so this is what we think about what they're trying to make us think. Let us know what you think in the comments, anywhere. We'll respond.